Okay, thank you. And so we are back from recess. We are still waiting for Director Rainbow to connect back with us, so we will forge ahead on the meeting. So the next item of business is closed business. I don't believe there is any closed business. Is that correct?
There's no closed agenda.
Okay, so we will skip over that in the rise and report. And the next is the consent agenda. Is there anything that anyone would like to pull? Otherwise, I'd accept a motion to approve the consent agenda. Councillor or Director Stoner, second by Director Ford. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Is there any business arising? Okay, not seeing any. I'll move on to new business. And who should I turn it over to here? Director Belsham?
Thank you, Director Pettengill. I will pass it over to Gail Harris, who will present the report today.
Hello, Gail Harris, Legislative Coordinator with the SLRD. This report is being presented to the committee to request direction as to whether the committee would like a terms of reference established. Establishing a terms of reference would provide guidance for both staff and the committee members and ensure alignment with the broader governance structure of the board. Staff are available for any questions.
Okay, any questions? And you may have to speak up. It's not letting me keep everyone on screen at the same time, so or make sure you raise your hand. Director Birch Jones.
Thanks. I just wondered, is this because, like, when, for example, we were looking at the sign bylaw that kind of came out of nowhere with the planning staff, and I was questioning, should this go before the policy committee? I've asked a couple things at the meetings. Is this something for the policy committee? Is that why we're talking about a terms of reference?
Through the chair, just in general terms, yes, that would assist in staff and the committee members knowing what would come to the policy committee versus going to the board and establish a mandate.
Did you want to follow up, Director Birch Jones?
No, I saw Director Ford. I saw Jen's hand up. Yeah, I thought, for example, that sign bylaw, I guess it was. And then I was corrected. Well, no, this is more of a bylaw where the policy committee is more for governance policies. And I seem to be the only one that didn't really understand that. So if that's the case, I don't think we need to develop a policy if it's really clear for everybody else what belongs here and what doesn't.
Okay, Director Ford.
My question was to staff. Are there any other committees that are still waiting on terms of reference from this body of work?
Through the chair, I'll get Director Belsham to maybe answer that.
Yeah, thank you. Angela Belsham, Director of Legislative and Corporate Services. On the governance work plan for this committee, one of the terms of reference that is still outstanding is for the Pemberton Valley Utilities and Services Committee. However, that terms of reference is currently on hold while we work through the recreation service transfer to the Village of Pemberton, and will come through for review once that transfer takes place, which will be complete January 1st, 2026.
Okay. So how much work do you expect this terms of reference will take? I thought the report was very clear on why we're doing it. How much work do you think this is?
Through the chair, I probably can't quantify in hours, but I do not expect it to take too long because we would probably use the EAD terms of reference as a template and then do possibly a review of other local body governments to see what other policy and governance terms of references are out there. I do not expect it to take much staff time.
Great, thank you.
Just a question of my own. I recall that we had I think a work plan we called it, which I think went to the board, which to my recollection outlined the policies we're going to look at. And then my understanding is that as a board, if we thought there was value in having the committee sort of chew on something before it comes to the board, we ask for that as a board. Otherwise, the board would deal with some topics directly. Are we just looking to enshrine that in a terms of reference, or is there things we're looking to change, or is something we're missing?
Through the chair, no, I don't think there's anything missing. I think it's just to provide clarity to the board and to the committee on their mandate and what would come to the policy committee versus going direct to the board.
Okay. I think I'm comfortable with that. I just want to make sure we're not sort of duplicating what we've already got, but it sounds like this is meant to add some clarity. So I think I'm comfortable with that. Are there any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Does someone want to, I guess there isn't a specific resolution. I guess, oh, there is let's see, I see Director Ford. Did you want to propose one of the options?
Sure. I would just say I'd make a motion that we direct staff to come back with a terms of reference similar to that of the area directors committee, with a simple mandate for this committee as soon as is practical. I don't want to put a date on it.
Okay, and Director Stoner, were you seconding, or did you have a question? Okay, so that's seconded. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none. Oh,
Sorry.
comments. I'll go Director Stoner. Sorry, Director Ford. Comments.
Oh, yeah, I think I've already said the report was very helpful. I think this gives us sort of a committee of the whole opportunity to see policies before they get fully baked and sent to the board. I think this will alleviate some of the work that we do at the board and hopefully streamline some of these processes. So thank you.
Okay, and Director Stoner, and then Director Birch-Jones.
Yeah, happy to support the recommendation on the floor and appreciate staff bringing this forward. I do think we have a fairly functional process now, but I do think it's always good to put it down on paper in terms of reference for clarity of other board members, those around this committee table, for staff, and especially in changeover time. So that a future board knows what is expected of this committee. So happy to see this go forward. Thank you.
Okay, and Director Birch-Jones.
Just wanted to confirm that draft terms of reference would come back to this committee for review before it went to the board.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
Okay, I'm in favor.
Okay, and I don't have anything to add to what's already been said, so I'll call the question. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, no opposition, motion carries. And I guess then we're on to the BC Hydro payments in lieu of taxes discussion. And Director Belsham, is this going to you again to maybe pass off to someone else, or maybe you're taking it?
Yeah, thank you. Director LaFrance, I believe, is in the boardroom to present this report.
Yes, hello. Let's see if the owls pick me up. They don't, but there we are. I'm Suzanne LaFrance, Director of Finance, and here to present this request for a decision. So the BC Hydro grants in lieu of taxes we receive for all of the BC Hydro properties within the SLRD, and specifically for dams, reservoirs, and powerhouses. When I reviewed the BC assessment data for all the BC Hydro properties, they also pay a small portion for other items, but it's a very small amount. It says 1% revenue on some of the parcels. So I'm not sure, it was really hard to differentiate between what's a dam and what's a reservoir and what's a powerhouse. In BC assessment data, they don't clearly lay that out. So I was just trying to see what parcels of land they had and what services were attributable to them before this meeting. And so basically the dams, reservoirs, and powerhouses within the SLRD are in the north area A's and area A and B, which is the Bridge River 1, facilities, the Bridge River 2 facilities, and the Lajoie facilities. And then in Area D, they have the Cheakamus facilities. And I researched a little bit about the whole system and I added the details in the report. The current policy, which is going to be opened up to the board, I'm just requesting some direction on how to do this. The last time the board opened up this policy was quite messy. And I remember the CAO at the time was Melanie Helmer, who was very new. And so it was a lot of unknowns when we opened up this policy, which I kind of want to avoid this time around. So I added the current policy funding pockets into the report for your review and the amounts as of 2025 that were being allocated, plus a percentage of that. And then how the current policy is treating these pockets. So general government currently receives 36%. It's a flat amount unless the increase annually is over 4%. And then that goes right to general government. Land use planning also gets a portion, but it's a flat amount. General select and all the areas select are flat amounts. Then there's specific services, Lillooet Rec Center, the Seton Chouette Fire Protection and Squamish Public Library that receive a flat amount annually. And then there's the Area A PILT reserves, and then the Area B PILT reserve. And those are for northern facilities specifically, and those accumulate every year with the 4% additional BC Hydro increase. There is also addition of Lillooet amount that we have given since 2013, and that is for the northern facilities as well, at a smaller portion. So all of the BC Hydro grants and loop taxes we receive, we allocate within a spreadsheet for all the northern facilities based on capacity, generating capacity in megawatts. And 20%, 40% of that goes to Area A, 40% goes to Area B, and then 20% split goes to just the Lillooet. And that's a direct amount that we send out. We don't keep it in-house. And then the
Director LaFrance, I just saw Director Burks-Jones with her hand up a couple times, so maybe there's some points of clarification in some of this logic. Director Burks-Jones?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Pettingill. Yeah, I have lots of questions about this and this approach. And I mean, I think I should wait maybe until we've heard the rest of Suzanne's or Miss LaFrance's presentation, but like there's just so many assumptions that we've already jumped through. So yeah, I'll wait maybe till Miss LaFrance is done, but thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Please continue.
And these are what the policy currently states. That's all I'm going over, what the policy currently states at this time. And Area D and the District of Squamish also get a reserve based on the Cheakamus southern area, which is the 4% annual increase, cumulative each year. Maybe I'll just pause if anybody has any questions on these funding pockets themselves. Seeing none, I'll just continue.
Oh, it looks like we do have a couple. I'll go Director Stoner and then Director Burks-Jones.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, thanks, Director LaFrance, for bringing this forward and trying to clarify. Specifically on the funding pots, I am curious where or how some items have been separated out. It's like there's the Lillooet Rec Center service, Seton Portage protection, fire protection, and the Squamish Public Library are separate from the rest of the area allocations. I'm just curious how that has happened.
Yeah, historically, before the Area A PILT reserves and Area B PILT reserve and Area D PILT reserve, we had a whole bunch of different funding pockets that were services of the SLRD. So when in 2014, when this was totally rehauled, revamped by the CAO Linda Flynn at the time, working with the Area A Director, Demare at the time. Those 3 pockets were decided to be grandfathered into this new policy versus taking out of the policy, but the other ones were deemed to be not attributable to. There was a few other pockets that we used to fund before this change that were deemed to be like not continuing on with this policy. It was just the board's decision at the time. So these 3 were grandfathered in from many years ago. And the
Thanks for that clarity.
2 are services of the SLRD, and the Squamish Public Library is not a service of the SLRD, but we have been providing operating funding historically from this pocket of fund.
Director Birch Jones.
Thank you. First of all, there's various amenity funds that come in to the SLRD. And I was really confused when I first started with the fact that, for example, in Area C, there's an IPP and there's what Director Mack calls amenity funds. It seems to be a fixed amount that's intended for Area C. The footprint is in Area C, and the amenity fund is spent mostly in Area C, or as the Area C director decides, right?
There is an agreement for those IPPs with the providers that inside that agreement, there is a $40,000 amount due per Area C facility. There's 2 in Area C. And sorry, I just lost my train of thought. And they're required to provide this 40,000 as long as they keep generating power. If they ever stop generating power, we wouldn't receive those funds any longer. And
So
it's
first
inside
of
the
all,
agreement, it does state what they can be used for.
first of all, we never should have agreed to a flat amount, but we should always ask for a percentage. And it would be, I think, easier if we always worked in percentages versus settling on flat amounts in terms of amenities. Like, so if we're just going to talk about the payment in lieu of taxes money, so there's also, okay, so there's Rutherford too. There's another IPP on a system, but I think that's something that Pemberton has an arrangement with, right? No? Is that the Area C? That's the number 2 in Area C? Okay, so similarly, that's an agreement that's going, the footprint is in Area C, and the money is.
Also in the Village of Pemberton now, because the Village of Pemberton changed their boundaries to try to get this 40,000, but in the end, it still turned out to be SLRD funding because of that agreement we have.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, these companies are they obligated to negotiate with the regional district? Because it seems like in some cases across the province, they negotiate with First Nations or individual municipalities and so on. So anyway, I mean, I'm good with negotiating with the regional district in terms of amenity funds from resource extraction. I think that the money should be spent where the footprint is as a general rule. So obviously, I think that the lion's share, in other areas, we're keeping to the thinking of you spend the money from the amenity where the footprint is, except in the north where the lion's share is going into general government and planning, but we're not applying that fairly across the board. Of course, I think more of those amenity, well, we'll call them PILT funds to keep it clear, should remain in the north for the benefit of the people that are living in the footprint of the resource extraction, in this case, hydro, right? Maybe I'll stop there because obviously we don't even have a policy on this, apparently, like the bigger picture, because other resource projects, like what are we going to do with with LNG, like there's other resource projects that are going to be putting money in or obligated to put money into either the SLRD or municipalities within the SL. Are we just going to stay away from the municipalities and only talk about the areas in this policy and only talk about BC Hydro? I guess that's the first question.
Oh, I just want to add some clarification here.
Sure.
Entity funds from the IPPs are not payments in lieu of taxes. They are not. They're not related to taxes. Taxes still go to Village of Permanent for Rutherford because the Rutherford is within their boundaries. And then we have the Miller Creek, which is still within Area C that we have taxation from. But this is an amenity fund totally separate from any taxation. So I don't want to mix that into any PILT discussion. Just wanted to make sure that's clear.
Okay. So Director Bertrand, I'm going to go to Director Ford and we can ponder that. I think there's probably a lot of things we've got to chew through here. So we'll take that as food for thought for now. And I'll go to Director Ford.
Thank you. And I agree with Director Birch Jones. This is confusing. And I think that's why this is a really important conversation for us to have, because I could see this being a very difficult conversation with the board. I think the board doesn't understand where this money comes from. As we're seeing in the report, these things go back to like 2001. And so I think some real clarity around why we get this money, how we'd like to disperse this money. You know, I guess, and my question to Suzanne is, one of the foreseeable outcomes of this discussion could be that we unlump or unpocket the lump sum and receive it as a regional district and then disperse it based on annual projects of need. Is that one of the potential outcomes of this? When I was reading the report, it felt like right now it's being split out, but if we were to say we get the full amount to the regional district and then the board can make decisions at budget time or you know, and I'm not suggesting this is how I would like it to go. I think having guardrails around it is a good thing, but is that one of the possible outcomes?
Hopefully not an annual thing that we have to administer each year and that we can stick to a policy where there are pockets that we're going to provide funding to. Within the report, I also have the provincial guidelines as to what they recommend. And there's 4 options there. The option 1 is to apply the full payment to general government. And most other regional districts do this just for the ease of application. And then the other option is another region-wide service. And then there's options for a group of region-wide services. So region-wide services are planning, general government, the Sea to Sky Trail, things like that. And then the 4th option is apply payment to a specific facility. And what I understand that to be is where those facilities are located, apply the payment towards those services. So I did a review of the BC Hydro properties and their services that they would be paying for if they were paying tax. And the majority of them are just the parks and trails. The new one we just added, the Area A and Area B parks and trails, obviously not the same Area A or Area B. And then there is that economic development Area B and District of Lillooet service that is also in a lot of the pockets. And then some of them have Shalaf fire protection. And the District of Lillooet fire protection as well. And I actually have it open right now. I'm just going to double check I didn't miss anything. Sorry, I just did this really quickly, trying to add some context to this conversation.
That's okay. And I think just while you're looking for that, I would suggest for the rest of the committee that one of the options that I like, just from a simplicity perspective, is if we were to apply and again, I'm not suggesting that this is what I would recommend, but if we were to apply this full amount to the general government fund, that would offset the bulk of the general government, or it would offset general government. And therefore, everyone would have sort of that clarity. And because one of the things I think we're all challenged with is that we've got so many different funding streams that are very difficult to understand when you look at, if we were to put this onto a whiteboard, the whiteboard would be 5 miles wide. It's so complicated. And so if this one lump was to offset our biggest fund planning or whatever it is, then when every area has their service areas, then you're getting a truer cost. One of the things I hear from Britannia Beach is that they're unclear on what they're paying for garbage removal or recreation services or whatever. And so I think it would clarify, it would lower the tax burden from each of those areas, also splitting out into general government. And then your sort of add-ons would be the service areas that each area opts into. Just one way of maybe simplifying how many times we see these applications for PILT funds. And often PILT funds are just like seem to be handed out in a, well, I want to send it to this group, I want to give it to that group. And while that kind of makes you feel good in the moment, it doesn't give clarity to where the money is coming from. Anyways, I'm sort of thinking this through as I go. When I read the report, I was like, how do we simplify this policy so much so that new directors coming in can understand, you know, the fact that we have 105 service areas and we have, you know, 70,000 different funding streams that we all have to try and keep clear is, I think, if we can seek clarity, that would be helpful. But I will cede the floor. Thank you.
Before I go to, sorry, thanks. Before I go to some of the other hands, I have a couple questions. One micro question. The funds that go to the Squamish Library as a part of the PILT funds, is that separate from, I believe it's select funds? Here, Director Rainbow and Director Herford sometimes talk about a gentleman's agreement. And is that the same funding stream or there's an additional funding stream?
So there is additional funding streams for select funds. So this is a separate amount that we annually provide. It's a very small amount, $14,000.
Okay, thank you. And I guess maybe similar to Director Ford, I sort of looked at this and find myself, it's hard to say, to look at this in isolation and say what's fair or not, because we're dealing with all kinds of restrictions and different needs, and sort of doing them in isolation doesn't pay attention to those. If we consider each funding source in isolation, I sort of would love, in theory anyways, to sort of look at all of our funding, kind of put it all together and say, how do we distribute it, this whole massive bucket? I take it that is not a feasible thing in the near term. So I'm left struggling, you know, how do we make sense of this one sort of isolated funding stream and dealing with it in a fair way? And I guess that's what I'm personally struggling with. So I'll go to Director Stone and then Director Birch-Jones, and maybe you have a magical idea.
I had other questions, but I want to follow up on two of Director Pettingill's questions. So one being the library funding. Do we provide other funding to the Squamish Public Library through other sources? Because my understanding that was always through the Southern PILT.
Yeah, so this annual amount has been traditionally provided since I can remember. But there's also a larger amount that Tony Rainbow with the District of Squamish have decided to also contribute about 40,000 a year to the library. Although there hasn't been a resolution this year, which I have Colin working on with Tony Rainbow.
But just to clarify, that does come out of the Southern Pilt.
Out of the Southern Hills.
Yeah, so still the same envelope.
Yeah, but it's separate. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't come out of yeah.
Yeah. And then to Director Pangill's comments of kind of struggling with working in this in isolation, I do think it's important to go back to Director LaFrance's comments that this is kind of a unique funding source because it is payment in lieu of taxes. Like those other service areas have mechanisms of taxation. This is a pot of funding that we get for resource extraction that is not paying taxes in its regular way. And so to me at least, that helps compartmentalize it a little bit. I agree with Director Ford that simplifying this would be really useful. I think both for the board, for staff, for transparency to our community. The piece that I really struggle with is the allocation of the percentages. So like if it's over 4%, like when I read the policy and the proposed questions to go back out to the board, the first one is like, is this an understandable policy? And I was like, no, I have no idea what percentages we're talking about. And so I think like to me, that's the starting point. Like, can we simplify this to a component of like, we're getting this much money from payment in lieu of taxes. We want X percentage to go to general government and then divide the rest up to areas impacted. And I think we are kind of there, but it feels like it's been overcomplicated with the year-over-year increase and then the reallocation and redistribution on an annual basis. And then some of these like grandfathered in service areas that are still standing, but unclear as to why they have been separated out. So those are the pieces that I think I would like to see at least streamlined in this round. I hear Director Penningill's call for like a broader discussion, but I would concur that that's probably not on the table right now. Again, going back to Director LaFrance's opening comments of not wanting to open the total can of worms. But I do think it is really important that we try and streamline this policy. My only other, I think, comment, and sorry, these end up being comments, not questions, but this staff report has two other pieces that I was curious about. One is there's some narrative in the staff report around interest from First Nations on how payment in lieu of taxes are allocated. It specifically speaks about Lillooet and Statliam nations, and I suspect that conversation would probably draw down south as well to Squamish Nation. However, those conversations are probably not quite as advanced. So I think that that's a really interesting part of this discussion and one that is probably important to try and at least have some conversation around as we review this policy. My other comment was going to be, I wonder if we want to actually bring this back to the committee before we go back out to the board for a survey. Because I feel like if we go to survey now, we might have more questions than answers with the proposed questions in this report. So those would be my thoughts. Thanks.
Hey, Director Birch-Jones.
I kind of agree that at least as a policy committee, we should be clear ourselves before we send out a survey. And also we want to consult with some of the First Nations. And I had lots of I'm good with a lot that's in the policy and the way that it's administered. I understand it now. It took me a while as a new area director. And so I get the intent of how it's working and I've learned the history and so on, but I just think it needs quite a bit of tweaking. For example, that rule about if it's more than 4%, it just goes into general government. I completely disagree with that. Whatever the increase is, it should just be allocated according to the percentages that we've all agreed to up front. And that rather than working in any flat rates, we should just agree on percentages. And that means sort of less, that would be fairer over time. I mean, I would like to increase the amount, for example, that goes to Seton Shalath, especially in anticipation, as Ms. LaFrance just told me, that there's going to be a big jump in that tax service in Seton. That's not going to look, I'm worried that I know that we sort of hit the limit on, I don't want to increase the taxes at this particular time. I also know the libraries, all of them need more money, so I would increase that percentage. I think we should have, take some from probably planning or general government and allocate a percentage to some of our intergovernmental relations. Like, we certainly have some work to do here in the north as a follow-up from the community to community forum. And we want to establish an intergovernmental group again, which is fantastic. And that costs some money. So we could allocate a percentage as well. My preference would be to take it from planning or general government, and so on. I have lots of tweaks like that. I'm wondering if it's not simpler. I guess this is a question for Ms. LaFrance. I'm always having trouble trying to figure out, like, do you put 100% of the payment in lieu of taxes contributions into this one and then divide it from there? Like, so there's a fair separation when we're allocating to select funds, for example. Is that taken out on a proportionate basis from the south and the north? Or they're just added together and then we take it from both? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we're not looking at those two funds separately. We're pooling them together, right?
I don't understand your question. Apologies. I'll try to explain how it works. The select funds amount are flat amounts. They haven't changed since 2013. So just like the planning percentage, those haven't been increased. Oh, the only thing that has been increased has been those area A and B and area D PILT and general government when it's over 4%. Everything else has been the same. So I do agree that we would want to change that. The policy does have a set date when that is supposed to change. However, because the BC Hydro grants have continually been over 4%, that has been pushed back just by the wording of the policy. So the current policy states we go to flat percentages, meaning the BC Hydro increase was 5% this year. All the funding pockets just get a 5% increase.
So right off the bat, wouldn't that be a good idea? Sorry.
Yeah, that's set to happen in 2027 now.
Good.
But hopefully we can even do that prior to 2027 and have it ready for the next, like, have the policy to the board with the changes before the budget's adopted this year, and then we don't have to worry about that changing anymore. Like, we can just set it currently in the new policy amendment. Does that make sense?
Okay, so what I was asking was, when I'm looking at that table that's on page 18, and you add the Bridge River 1, Bridge River 2, La Joie, Northern, and then you add Checamoo, Southern, total grants. So you've got the total amounts of monies over the various years. But then farther down in the allocations, are we working from the combined totals of the north and south for those allocate? I mean, I know there's certain ones, like the library and fire services in the north are coming out of the northern pelt, and the library in the south is coming out of the southern pelt, right? Or is it coming out of the grand total?
Okay, I think I know where you're going now. That
Right.
top portion of that spreadsheet is all just separating the built based on the megawatt capacity. It's not allocating it in the SLRD budget. It's just showing what that capacity is. So the Northern Bridge River 1, currently in 2025, based on a 30%, based on the estimated capacity, it was 579,000, but that wasn't allocated anywhere. That's just for information. So it's just showing you the total grant that would be attributable to Bridge River 1.
Right.
And then total grant that would be attributable to Bridge River 2. And so it just helps these types of conversations where are we providing the taxation, are we providing the pilt to the right place?
Okay, so maybe I'll try and let's see. Is it simpler to look at those two funds from the north and the south separately? Is that easier for people to understand? Is that easier for you to, is that easier for taxpayers? Is that easier for board members to separate? Because they look like they're rolled together and then funds are taken out from the grant that maybe I don't understand it. The funds are then taken out from the grand total of the two, or are we working sometimes from just from the one fund and sometimes from just from the other? And if so, why not separate? I'm thinking, especially if we're going to do a survey for the board, totally, wouldn't it be easier for them to look at their respective areas?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just want to support Director LaFonce and get some clarity on the question. As I understand, looking at it historically, the megawatt chart that's on earlier on in the report showing the percentage total of megawatts that are being driven by all these areas is what historically informed those allocations that are in the funding pocket. So you'll see that area D, there's less megawatt pull in the area D. Southern area allocation is less than the other allocations. So that's what, as I understand it, that's what informed this funding pocket chart. I do agree the percentage, is it a percentage or is it a flat amount? And it sounds like the percentage is the way to go because it looks like it's actually a flat amount that's been decided. And I do agree that moving forward in a new policy, a percentage would be, everyone would benefit from an increase. And I wanted to point out too, looking at it historically, that there is a lot of conversation amongst regional districts about this, especially those that are very large, on how they, well, it's happening in my backyard, so all the money should be allocated. And from a regional district perspective, many regional districts are looking at how these energy production areas have an impact on climate and livability in the entire area, which is why sometimes you'll see it invested in general governance and also a way of keeping taxes down. I wanted to just, if I could, can I just summarize up to now what I'm hearing from the board, which might be something that we bring back to committee? Would that might help us, and then we can go from there if there's something missing?
Well, actually, I might just jump in with a couple thoughts that may sort of may propose something a little bit there, if that's all right. I just, one point, and it's a bit of a response to Director Stoner. I think we generally, with normal SLRD taxation, we have a significant amount coming from municipal areas going into a general fund, which is then primarily I think used for services in electoral areas. So I think that's one approach where you sort of pool the funds and put it towards arguably greatest need. Here, there's been a bit of a bias towards, I would say, allocating to where the impact is or the footprint is, as we've talked about. And to my mind, that's maybe before we get into percentages or this and that allocations, is there a general principle of, yes, we agree we should limit the funding exclusively or mostly to where the footprint in it is, and maybe that's the sort of first question, sort of philosophically we can wrap our heads around. I think there are some nuances to that, like how do we share with First Nations and address those impacts and so on. Or are we, it's not about footprint, it's about greatest need, and that's what we are trying to address with this. I think there's a separate discussion in my mind. It's a separate discussion about, and we've just mentioned it briefly, but we have these broad sort of categories of Well, who makes the decision? Is the board that finally decides the specific allocations? Is it a specific director? Is it the AAD committee? Is it a recommendation or an actual decision? I think some of those things are maybe we can separate out as a second a secondary discussion, very important, but sort of a next step. So I think the first thing for me is to decide: do we have a philosophical principle of is it a greatest need thing we're trying to address here, or is it addressing impact where it happens, sort of thing? Does that align, CAO Paul? Oh, actually, I see Director Ford's hand.
Just a point of clarity, Chris, because I agree mostly with what you're saying there. But I think the other piece to that is, yes, the footprint, but also the number of people that are impacted in that area. When we're talking about areas, Goldbridge, etc., very few people live there. Not to say that the need isn't great. They're also very remote. And so the need may be greater in ways that, because they can't raise the same tax base to support the services that they've come to expect. So there's a greater need in less populated areas. However, should the impact, the entire region, yeah, I think I like your line of thinking on, what's the philosophy? Are we trying to support everyone equally, or are we trying to support greatest need? And I think that's a question for the board. So I like this idea in the report that we would go out to the board with sort of where are your values? And this isn't to, kind of rewrite the whole policy, but to say, is this policy still serving the greatest impact that these services are having in our region? If they're creating more waste per capita, for example, then perhaps the money is allocated in that way. The thing, and I honestly like the percentages and the splitting out based on megawatts, I think distracts me personally from the bigger question of what if this was taxes being collected on these services, or let's call them houses. Okay, so BC Hydro is now a house, and the size of the impact of that house, if it were in a municipality, would generate this number, this amount of tax, and that tax would then offset the burden on smaller houses, which is a bad example, but that's kind of how I'm seeing this partition out. Is if we were to allocate it based on the impacts that they're having, that is understandable for the community and for the board that have to make this decision. I think splitting it out by megawatts doesn't really sit well with me. So I would be interested in hearing a simple formula that allows us to understand where the board's mind and where our values align on how this money should be impacting the areas that are, most impacted. Like if they're taking up all of the available rental housing in an area, and then that's causing our residents to sort of unfairly shoulder the burden, then that should be accounted for. But this, how much energy is produced in an area where maybe there's very few people living doesn't feel right. So I would be interested to have this conversation again with some more clarity on that and some more simplicity around how much money are we talking and how would it have the best impact in these areas.
So are we, sorry, Director LaFrance, did you want to?
Yeah, I agree with everything that was just stated. It's obviously every parcel pays into general government, so that's a given, as you're trying to use that, it's a one house theory. And then trying to find the values, I just don't know how to ask that of the board. That's why we were trying to find maybe showing the current pockets and then what they like, what they don't like, and have the opportunity to add their own information into the survey too. But I don't know if that would be too much varying data to go through, keeping it open like that. But yeah, I don't know how to, survey the board on what they value unless we just keep it open as a general and then bring it back to the policy to review, policy committee to review. Just requesting some direction there.
Director Birch Jones.
Thank you. I'm curious. Okay, first of all, do people agree? It sounds maybe like they do with, if we are going to divide this up, at least we should work on a percentage basis and get rid of some of the flat rate stuff. And can we stop the practice of, if it's over 4%, it goes into general government? Rather, we could just go, no matter what the increase is or decrease, it just gets applied across whatever funding formula we've agreed to on a percentage basis. To me, that's sort of fair and makes sense year over year. But also, is it helpful to separate out what we're doing? And I guess this is because I'm still not 100% on this. So this really, Suzanne, is just, are the northern and southern PILT funds put together? 75% comes from the north, 25% comes from the south. Are those put together and then we are allocating from that? Or are they divided? Like I still don't have a really clear picture on that, because if we are working, there might be different feelings in the north and the south on how the PILT allocation goes. We've got a bit of a mix here. It's okay, it's working. I think it needs some tweaking, and I think there's a couple of principles that, see, like, I just think, of course, that the funding should be more directed to where the footprint is. I believe that's the sort of thinking on these resource funds in general, but it may be that the board doesn't agree with that. And when Suzanne talks about, well, there's some general regional projects and mentions Sea to Sky Trail, like right away I go, well, Sea to Sky Trail doesn't have too much. I would have a big problem with the PILT funds from the north being pummeled into the Sea to Sky Trail, for example. We have a massive amount of work to do up here on trails. We're just not in the same level of development. And where we have an issue is working with our First Nations partners up here. And so then I would go right back to, and we need a fund for some of that intergovernmental, and some of the northern PILT could be used for that. And where that would come from would probably be planning, because this would be planning, and that would make sense to me. That makes sense in the north. That might not make sense in the south. So should we be talking about these two separate funds separately, or should we be talking about them together before we go and do any surveys? Can we talk about that as a policy committee?
So I think those are things we can talk about. I'm not clear about what's part of this discussion and what's out. I would just, what I would infer from our current policy is that we generally feel that these funds should go to the area where the project is, generally to the electoral area as opposed to municipal projects. And but there's a limit, and that's, I think, where this 4% thing comes in, where while in general it should be where the footprint is, there's an amount where it gets so great it then makes sense. If it's so big, it should be more broadly shared. And so we have kind of like a hybrid of things, and that's what we've tried to, I think, express with the current formula, which is really complex. But maybe the first step is, can we agree that in general, we still like that principle, and then we're just kind of fiddling with the numbers, or do we think that that general principle we have now is incorrect?
Thank you.
I'll go to Director Stoner.
Yeah, thanks. Trying to figure out how I can add value that will move us forward. I think in general, I think it's important that a portion continues to remain to go into general government. Director Burge-Jones, to your point, like if you take the money out of planning, we just end up taxing for it. And that has really direct implications for all of our residents. And I do think it's only fair that projects of this size pay their fair share for general government services, even though they're not necessarily using that specific service. It's what allows us to do all the work that we do. So I think to me, like where I'm getting to is like there's a question here around that like 4%, as Chris just mentioned, like at some point is the amount so great that it gets pooled or does it get divided up? For me, I think keeping a portion to general government and then keeping a portion to northern allocation and southern allocation makes sense. What I would like to see, I think, starts to dovetail with another conversation that we've been having around clarifying our grant in aid process, which is like where the electoral area select services PILT money goes to. And so if we're going to keep shoring that up, I think that that requires a little bit more structure to it and transparency. And then, as I mentioned previously, like how do we then fold in the standing commitments that exist into just the existing northern versus southern allocations as opposed to keeping them separate? So to me, I see three buckets, like one's general government, one is northern allocation, and one is the southern allocation. And we can talk about how we divide that up. And that's probably where there's tension.
Okay, Director Burge-Jones.
Just to ask Director Stoner, so do you think that planning, for example, for intergovernmental work with First Nations, do you think that should come out of planning or general government within the SLRD? Or like, yeah.
Yes.
You do.
I think that this is a great funding source. Like we've talked about shoring up that portion of our organization, and there's a lot of work to be done there. I think this is a great opportunity, whether it comes from the Northern PILT or the Southern PILT or just generally PILT funds, to shore up that work. Whether we just add more to the general government and we take some out of the Northern and Southern allocations. I think that's the debate to be had.
You probably, maybe just an example of something that's happened to me early in my career here as an electoral area director. I wanted to send a letter to everybody in one of my communities about a geologic hazard that had been identified, and the SLRD was going to post it on the website for everyone to see. And a lot of my area B guys don't necessarily go to the website, and I'm saying, well, I'll need a letter. I'd like a letter to go to this small number of residents who were directly at risk. Okay, and the response was, that will have to come out of your select funds, right? For the postage, the cost of getting a letter out. And so I thought, okay, so all that money that goes into general government, for example, from the north, from the payment in lieu of taxes, that's not available to me for doing something like that in Area B. For doing something in Area B, I have to go to this small fund. So I better make sure I protect that small fund, and maybe it should be bigger, given the impact of some of the hydro facilities around here. I mean, of course, I think it should be, but that's when I kind of saw that some of this, I didn't think that was a particularly fair situation, but this is the position that we're in with the sort of fewer taxpayers, really. I mean, and a much poorer population coming from Area B, is that's how it's going to be. So I'm trying to secure some of those funding that comes from the north to be spent in the north. That's where I'm going with this, including hopefully some of the work to be done with some of the statlium that I know is coming up here pretty quick. So yeah.
I'm just going to jump in
Just
quickly,
an
and then I'll
example.
go to Director Stoner. I think we should be careful. I think you're raising a legitimate concern, Director Birch Jones, but I think that's, trying, for me, those are other discussions and things we need to address as a board, and do electoral area directors have sufficient funding to do various things, and how those things get funding and so on is sort of separate to a general broad strokes allocation of built funds in my mind. And so I think that's sort of one argument for opening up the whole thing and big picture. If we're not, then I think we do kind of need to look at this in isolation as more of a funding thing and a general broad allocation. And then I think it's a secondary discussion in my mind about, okay, well, how do we, maybe this is one source, but how do we make sure that electoral area directors are sufficiently funded? To my mind, is a second, very important, but a second discussion. But I'll go to Director Stoner and then come back to you.
Yeah, and I think maybe this reflects the can of worms that Director LaFrance spoke about at the start of her presentation. And I totally hear where you're coming from, Director Birch Jones. I think this is the tension that regional districts get set up with in the way that we do our financing. And there's a real tension point here of like, if we had more support in general government, then we could potentially hire more staff who could then become more responsive. Whereas if we each have our individual pot of money that we are hoarding away and then trying to use, that still taxes the same group of staff. At the end of the day, we haven't necessarily added staff capacity. We've just added more ways for people to ask them to do different things. And so I think that's the tension that I see in the way that this is set up. This is a really naive question to me, back to Director LaFrance, of the northern allocations or the southern allocations for electoral area A, B, area DDoS, for example. Those are separate from the area select services. Is that correct?
That's correct. So
Is there a way that we could just fold the select services into the different regional allocations? Like, what's the rationale behind separating those out?
they have been part of the PILT since I can remember. So I found very, very old files back to like 1998, and select funds were a part of that PILT. And so to take those away would take away any area C select, because there is no BC Hydro generating facilities in area C. So that would be the biggest change. And it's unfortunate that these select funds are wrapped into the PILT funds, but it's always been that way.
Yeah, that's helpful context. And it's interesting to think about, like, as we try and streamline this and like different ways that that money gets moved. Like, is that one area where we just have one less cost center per se, but the dollars still flow? Perhaps I recognize that might not be to area C if we just do it through the existing allocation services. But those are the sorts of questions that in 10 minutes we're not going to answer. But I do think moving this forward, I don't feel comfortable going out to the board with the questions that are presented in the staff report at this time. That in itself is not a super helpful comment. I'm trying to come up with a way to move us forward. So let me reflect on that for a minute.
Okay, Director Birch Jones, are you okay if I go to CIO Paul? Maybe I'm hoping there's another or a magic idea about how we move this forward.
Thank you. Yes, I think what could happen is taking this conversation, and it's great that it's public and it's recorded. We could provide of those funding pockets, some options that were discussed here, ones that are very simple and compartmentalized, and ones that might address other more broader options. So perhaps the first step is taking this discussion and going, here's what that would look like in a funding pocket model, and focusing on simple plus all and then another option that includes all the comments here. Would that be helpful to bring back to the board? And I think one thing that would help inform it, if I may suggest, is that we see things like the Seton Shalath Fire Protection, Squamish Public Library, Lillooet Rec Center separated out, and there's good reason why that was, because there was a continuous demand year over year, so they thought this is the money you can always count on. Perhaps it's helpful also to take all the nonprofits, a report, and how they are funded over the year and how they've been funded, which could inform where the PILT's going. And it might actually, to Director Stoner's, how can we actually make this easier? If this is happening every year, maybe we just put it in policy, or how do we pull it back and say, we're gonna make it simple and we're gonna budget ahead for area A PILT and area B. So we'll make it simple with a budget ahead, being informed by our prior year spending for those nonprofits and requests.
I may push back, and sensitive to the time, but it feels like there's maybe an unanswered philosophical question and it's those philosophical questions, and maybe looking into a little bit of numbers is helpful. But I think the more we do that, the more we start chasing down of just budgeting for existing specific services, which I think doesn't really in the long term address how do we manage PILT. And so I have some inclination to figure out some of those higher level questions of how do we balance between electoral areas and general governance, direct electoral areas versus electoral areas through general governance, that where are we sitting on that, and try and leave out the specific things being funded in the first cut. I think that's maybe a second pass or the next part of the discussion. Does that make sense to people?
If I'm hearing
Sure.
that, we could sort of look at, so for example, coming up in October, we'll have a number of requests for wreath contributions for the legions, and we'll all make some contributions to our legions. And then depending where they're at during the year, we'll get other requests depending on what they're doing. I'm just in the EAD, right? That the select funds definitely are beautiful in terms of being able to be responsive to what the needs are in our communities. So if we're talking about just going, well, on average, the Legion takes, $2,000 a year in area B, so that's what we'll plan on funding them. And then again, I would say, well, then we should be working in percentages rather than real numbers. But anyway, I don't like it because it sort of eliminates the role of the electoral area to try and distribute those funds in the most effective way possible in the area. So I'm not sure that's
So
a helpful exercise.
just
I mean,
try.
unless we want to show, here's how it's working. Of course it might be of interest, and that's why the minutes of the EAD come up on the consent agenda every single month, just so that you might want to know how those funds are being spent in the electoral area close to you, or maybe all of the EADs, but that's there. But I don't know that there's a steady pattern. It seems to be a very variable way that things go because the needs shift in the electoral area. So it's nice to be able to respond to those with those funds. And if they're bigger requests, to use the payment in lieu of taxes funds, which of course all of the select funds are payment in lieu of taxes funds, but they're just administered through a different process. That is really all the funding that the EADs do control comes from payment in lieu of taxes, at least in area B. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe in the interest of moving it forward, then, CIO Paul, maybe the best next discussion is to follow generally what you're talking about, but just pull out and highlight the sort of philosophical principle that this sort of option with this specific higher level funding mechanisms, it underlines this principle versus that principle. And so people can sort of decide, are they focused more on the principles or what it means on the ground in terms of more immediate funding. I'm sort of not sensing a specific consensus either way. So maybe this is a way to look at both pieces in our next discussion a little bit. Does that see how, Paul?
Clarity, the principles you were talking about are area of impact versus greater need. Is that the philosophical principle that you're?
Yeah, those sorts of where the impact happens geographically, tying these things, or going to general governance and more of board priority, bigger picture discussion, and or some hybrid.
So taking the philosophical, because staff want to be very provide data and information and don't want to put opinion on this. And so taking the philosophical, let's just call it different strategies. And one strategy would be area of impact. Another strategy would be area of impact, so the location, geographic. The other one being greater need. And then a third being more to the benefit of all. And likely what would be proposed may have hybrids of a few of those options. Similar, like the one we currently have is a hybrid of two options that the province suggests.
Yeah, absolutely. And then maybe we can chew on this as a group for the next time we meet. Do we need a specific resolution, or is there someone that wants to propose an adjustment or is uncomfortable with where we're headed? I mean, I think it seems that we're just at a point of we need to think about this and discuss it a bit more. So are we okay with taking this approach to doing that? Director Bruce-Jones? You're on mute.
Thanks. I think if we're going to float this with the board,
I think this is coming back to us.
It's coming back to us. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I think we should be a little more solid, and I think we should actually have Chair Rainbow here too for some of the discussion. He's a glaring absence here today a little bit. We should kind of get ourselves in a place where we can make some recommendations, but then I see the other complicating factor is in the report, it's talking about consulting with First Nations in the next month, I believe, about what their wishes are around the paint, because of course their populations are counted in for some of the formulas that we do and what their wishes are. But I had a question for CAO Paul is who's going to do that, how and when?
Thank you. Just a clarification, Community Works Funds is the one that uses First Nation on reserve populations.
Right, that's right. Sorry.
Ask that question, and there's no direction when it comes to that here. BC Hydro has different negotiations that they do outside of PILT. However, we are planning on having that information ready for the December. It's always been on the plan to have that information and feedback from the nations ready for the December policy committee. So
maybe I don't think I followed that. So
I think we will have more information subsequent to further discussions with the nations that will inform us and allow us to make a better decision on these policies, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, that is the plan.
Sorry, I did not hear. It sort of broke up. There's some construction going on in my front yard too, just for added complexities. So we have a policy committee meeting in December, and are we going to be trying to get some input from the nations before then? Is that what I really didn't hear what you said? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. The plan is, and it has been confirmed that the information would be ready for the December meeting. In consultation, the organization has the Indigenous Relations Advisor and does work in conjunction with all the nations and communications, and we have some upcoming meetings that are potentially planned, and this will be a topic of discussion. It has been proposed as a topic of discussion and accepted. So the plan is that we will have information for this committee in the next meeting, which is in December.
Okay, and I'm just going to go to Director Ford quickly. It looks like, and then we'll wrap it up. Director Ford.
Thank you. I'm not feeling well, so I feel like my head is spinning a little bit on all of these plans. Can we workshop this? Can we just like get this onto a simple workshop where I think 5 of us with Tony and staff present, maybe we take 45 minutes during a board meeting day to just sit with this, write it up on the whiteboard so that we can kind of clarify some of these outstanding questions rather than going into a decision-making meeting. I just feel like there's more questions than answers right now. And I apologize if I'm not following the bouncing ball, but I just feel like I would like a workshop on this. Not the whole policy to like unpack it and start from scratch, but just to answer some of these questions. And I can't stand doing this on Zoom. So I would rather us do this in person because I am not following.
Yeah, I think seeing lots of nodding heads. So I think if we can schedule some time in November before or after one of our meetings, that would work well. Seeing nodding heads. Director Stoner.
I was just going to see a staff line that is a motion so that we bring this back to the committee as a workshop in advance of the December meeting so we can provide further clarity to staff on how we want to move it forward.
Okay, and leave it to the chair to schedule that. The chair of the board.
Can we do it earlier?
With Tony, I'll take this off with Tony and we can figure out a time that works.
Staff may not like my motion, so before it gets seconded, let's hear from staff.
Yeah.
CEO Paul.
So staff would like to get working on this. There's a lot of work involved in what would be coming forward in December. So November would be too late for us to do work to bring information forward in December. I would look to Director Belsham for some feedback. This sounds like this is a workshop, but it is moving the business. So it would be a scheduled public workshop in person. And we would need to, I think what I need to do is look at a calendar to make sure we can schedule this and be able to get the work that needs to be done from that feedback. And I would like to work with vice chair and chair with vice chair being present today on what that agenda would look like, what questions we'd like to answer and ask. And
okay, just for clarity, timing wise, could this be part of the October regional district meetings if we could find some time in there? Is that soon enough?
That would be my preference. I wouldn't want to wait till November. And again, this isn't intended to create more pre-work for staff. This is to take the information we currently have and take the questions that have just been batted around for and to, be able to ask those questions differently so that we can get something more clear for staff to present in December.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I feel like staff might have with this discussion something that a lot of information that could be brought forward in December. But I do feel like the committee itself might have unanswered questions that we don't know about. It is more work for staff to host a public workshop meeting. It will be, just to be clear. However, if it moves us forward and there's a benefit to it, we're all in. Just need some clarity on what we'd like answered, which problem you're trying to solve and how we get there, so we can make it the most effective for everyone.
Okay, Director Stoner, and then I have a thought.
Yeah, can I seek clarity on when the policy needs to be updated by? Is there a timeline?
Really, I was hoping to have it done with the budget adoption. The financial plan is adopted in the March board, so that would be ideal, because then I won't have to make any changes. You know, the budget will be with the PILT as per the new policy, but if the budget's adopted and the PILT funds change, I'm gonna have to amend the budget. It's not a big deal, so I'm hoping for March, but we can extend it to whenever needed.
So if staff bring back a reflection of what they've heard today, and we can bat this around again at our December committee meeting, that doesn't sound like it's putting staff out for too long. And we can just make sure that that committee meeting happens in person, would be my suggestion, if possible.
Okay, I'm going to suggest that that's our backup, and we leave it to the chair of the board and this committee to see if we can pull something off for October. If we can't, then we will fall back to tackling this in December, because I think we're talked out for today. And so so a motion that the board chair and committee chair try to schedule a follow-up meeting for October. And if not workable, we will take the CAO's recommendation to see a next draft in December at the policy committee meeting. Second by Director Stoner. Any comments? Director Birch-Jones?
I like the suggestion of Jen Ford to try and sort of workshop. I think you're thinking if we could be in person for an hour, we might get farther than on Zoom, and I 100% agree with that, especially maybe with this table that's confounded me. this page 19 that where Director LaFrance has laid it out. This is exactly where we're at. We could sort of work from that. I still have a couple questions that I'll just ask Director LaFrance individually, so I make sure I understand it. But in person, October, great. Maybe November, December, just depends on what happens with the winter. The weather is so crazy. I don't think we should plan an in-person in December necessarily. But I'm also a little bit worried about what staff are going to present to the First Nations in the interim. Are they just going to present like, this is what we're doing? What do you think? Because then they're also going to be looking at this very confusing table. No,
we haven't give direction on what we're doing yet. So it'll be, I think staff will be learning and I assume it would have to be the perspective, because we haven't given staff direction. So there's nothing to communicate to First Nations about what we're doing. So with that, I will call a question. Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. And then I think we are on a motion to terminate. Director Stoner, Director Ford seconds. Any opposition? Nope, we are terminated.